kemari Pak Emil Salim, representative from ANU, and also, of course, my representative from my former office, LPM, and also IST, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation for the Sadli lecture. I'm the last minister to present, and my colleagues already left for other meetings. But I know why, because I have to be here to make sure that the money will come. Because among the 34 ministries in the cabinet, we are the only one, the ministry that producing the revenue. Others basically more on the spending side. So that's why I'm the last to make sure that the revenue will still be around. Okay, talking about the services sector in Indonesia, let me divide my remark into two parts. The first part about services sector in the macroeconomic framework in Indonesia, and secondly maybe a little bit about the financial services. Of course, when we learn about the macroeconomic or economic development, we always think that the phase of development or economic development in any country should start from the primary sector like agriculture or mining, and then moving on to the secondary sector, especially manufacturing and construction, and should end up ultimately at the services sector. It means service sector should be kind of the highest achievement in terms of making the economy, making the economy of the country, giving the prosperity to the people. In Indonesian case, I think we have been on the secondary level since 1990s. If you remember, the booming of the Indonesian economy back in 1990s is due to the manufacturing sector. And I think it has been a great achievement because at that time, when there are so many countries, even now, still relying on natural resources, Indonesia actually already shifting to the manufacturing sector with the value added. Of course, in 1990s, we know it is mostly labor-intensive manufacturing. Even now, if you look at the data of the GDP, by individual sector, manufacturing is still number one in terms of contribution to the GDP. But if you try to make the grouping of sectors, let's say now we have 11 sectors in economy, and you make a group, let's say, primary, secondary, and tertiary, or tertiary meaning services sector, then basically service sector contribute more. And you can see at the latest 2015 data, when you look the growth of individual sectors, some sectors that contributed, that growing fastest in Indonesian economy in 2015, I think number one is financial services, and then transportation, and then information and communication, Pak Rudiantara sectors. I think those three sectors plus construction. So those four basically are the fastest growing sector in 2015. And if you look, three of them coming from services sector. Meaning that implicitly Indonesia might be already in the stage of service-dominated or service-generated economy rather than manufacturing dominant economy. But then we forgot one thing. We forgot that when we had manufacturing as a leading sector, we don't really develop our manufacturing well. Our manufacturing becoming booming in 1990s mostly because of, number one, relocation from Japan at that time. Relocation of labor-intensive industry from mostly East Asia, Japan, Korea, to Indonesia, mostly from Japan. And then, of course, at that time, Indonesia, under the so-called Suharto era, still has quite lenient and relaxed labor regulation. No labor union, no issue of minimum wage, no issue about labor. So at the end, combination of the high investment from Japan, relocation, plus the abundant supply of the labor, creating Indonesian competitiveness at the time in labor-intensive industry. But then after the Asian financial crisis, suddenly manufacturing sector disappeared. They are still contributing most, but the role in economy, especially becoming disappearing and replaced by, at the time, the emergence of the commodities. Not oil and gas like in 1970s, 80s, but by coal and palm oil, plus mining products. During that time, you can see that the role of manufacturing declining, and then suddenly people really excited about these commodities. And you know the story, the rest of the story, that basically most of the rich people, coming from the coal or either coal or palm oil industry. But then the end of the commodity price boom in 2012 especially put us on the reality. The reality is still we cannot depend too much on the natural resources, but unfortunately at the time we haven't, or basically we forgot to keep developing the foundation of our manufacturing sector. So the culmination of the situation is basically 2015, when the price is so low, and then we don't have the alternative source of growth. Even we are trying to give more attention to the manufacturing sector. For example, in our case, when we issue a tax holiday regulation, let's say if I give the priority to 10 sectors, 9 of them is manufacturing. And not just simple manufacturing, but we want more advanced manufacturing with the higher value added. But still, manufacturing development takes time. And again, the Indonesian problem is sometimes we are not patient enough to try to develop our competitiveness in any sector actually. But then in manufacturing, you need more time, you need technology, you need capable human resources. Unfortunately, we don't have the patience in terms of time. We don't have enough capable human resources in manufacturing, and we don't have sometimes enough capital allocation or capital accumulation in manufacturing. Because at that time, if you look at the portfolio of the bank's credit, some banks now are in really big problem because they give credit too much to the coal mining. And I don't have to name the banks, but you can see from the latest financial report in 2015, some banks that suddenly have small profit from previously very high profit, it must be the bank with the non-performing loan from the especially coal company. So this kind of problem, I think the typical problem of Indonesia. So we always follow the global trend. Now everybody's talking, like Pak Rudiantara mentioned, about the e-commerce, all services sector related to the IT and everything else. But still, I think we need to remind ourselves. Of course, we need to move on to the service sector. We have to be competitive in service sector, or at least we should be adaptive to the development of the modern services sector. And given the fact that now we have to compete in the ASEAN Economic Community. But you cannot forget the importance of the manufacturing sector. As long as the contribution of manufacturing sector still less than 25% of GDP, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion more as individual, Indonesia might not have a sustainable growth in the future. You need to have at least 25% or better more, or 30% to be better. Otherwise, you jump directly from primary sector, traditional sector like agriculture, like mining, to the e-commerce, the IT sectors. Of course, now we are excited about the creative economy, things that created by Bu Mary in the previous cabinet. But don't forget, in order to be competitive in the creative economy, of course, you need very capable and talented human resources. And then, somehow, even for manufacturing sector, we still don't have enough capable human resources to work on that. And I think it's clear that creating best fit human resources in in the creative economy must be more difficult than in manufacturing. And even in manufacturing, we don't have enough. What happened with the creative economy? Of course, you can tell us some of the few talented Indonesians. They are overseas or they are here in Indonesia, but they are only scattered talents. We don't have really, a system to develop human resources in the, let's say, in creative economy, or kind of blueprint how to make Indonesia competitive in the creative economy. You cannot say if, let's say, we have a genius piano player like Joy Alexander, meaning that we already there, in the competition of the global creative economy. I don't think it's the answer. The answer should be the system and establish system to make sure Indonesia will produce talents and will produce competitiveness in the creative economy. Again, this is my individual opinion, but I think it's important for us to realize that there is no instant in developing the economy. I think Bu Mari, Pak Emil, that have served the cabinet for quite some time, understand that, in our idea to make Indonesia, more livable, more prosperous, is far from easy. But then, we don't need to complete everything at once, in 5 years, for example. But at least we need to be consistent. If our predecessor has done something, why don't you move a little bit up or even further up? That's the only way to make Indonesia more sustainable. Currently, I'm a bit worried that we are not sustainable if just following the instinct. Now the IT, now the e-commerce. Why don't everybody goes to e-commerce? It's like in 2005, 2006, when suddenly coal becomes, a hot commodity in the global market in Indonesia, then suddenly everybody without any background in the mining industry go to the coal. As long as I have the liquidity, buying the coal. If I don't have the money, borrowing from somebody, from the bank, and buying the coal. What happened? High NPL in some of the Indonesian commercial banks. So this is what I'm trying to tell you about the sustainability of the growth. We need the growth, but we need the growth with the lowest risk possible. And we cannot afford to have high growth in certain period, but with higher risk in the period after that. So it means that we really need to pay attention to the stability of the economy, to the fundamental of the economy. And I still believe manufacturing is still important. And then once we have an established manufacturing sector in Indonesia, then it's time for us to go for services. I had a very nice discussion with, I think, CEO of the Goldman Sachs. And he told me about the progress in US. I mean, what happened with the US economy. Of course, we are talking about Fed rate and everything. But I'm more interested when he told me that US is ready to give up on the automotive industry. Detroit can be a history because Ford, GM, and what else? Chrysler are no longer competitive, let's say compared to Japan or even European cars. What happened? I asked him, so what will happen to those industries? Well, we might still have Ford, Chrysler, or Chevrolet, GM, but made somewhere outside US, probably mostly in Latin America or in Mexico. And then, what happened with manufacturing in US? We will only concentrate in the high-tech manufacturing or high-tech services. And that will be the future of the US economy. But no longer automotive industry. We give up to keep the automotive industry in the US. In Australia, they might have the last production of automotive in Australia in 2017, because by that time, the last factory will leave Australia. And when I asked them what happened with Holden, there will be Holden, but maybe made in somewhere outside Australia. So it means we need still to be focused what kind of sectors that Indonesia will have the advantage. Let's say US really leaves the automotive industry, I think Indonesia is in good position to expand the automotive industry. Currently, at least for automotive industry itself, it has been a trade surplus, meaning that we export the cars and vehicles more than we import, only on the specific automotive sector. While in the past, usually automotive sector is a sector with a lot of privilege, a lot of incentive, they are asking for protection here and there. But now, I think the environment is different, time is different. Now, I think Indonesia should capitalize the position. Of course, it doesn't mean that Indonesia doesn't need to care about services, but again, we need to establish our manufacturing sector first. We already have agriculture sector, we have already mining sector. Why don't we take care of this manufacturing sector before we do so-called the quantum leap to the services sector? And let me move a little bit, because I also have to rush for another meeting. Financial services. Of course, you can see a lot of foreign ownership in financial services. It always creates debate, always creates critics. Why those sectors still dominated by foreign ownership? I think we need to be more realistic, especially if we have to compete in ASEAN. In terms of banking sector, for example, Bank Mandiri might be the biggest in terms of asset in Indonesia, but when you put the Mandiri in ASEAN, they might be only number 8 or number 7, because some banks in Singapore will dominate, and then followed by banks in Malaysia, and even Bangkok Bank in Thailand. The question is, how come the biggest bank in Indonesia, 250 million people, the largest GDP in ASEAN, only ranked number 8, much less than banks in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand with much less population and lower GDP. I'm talking about total GDP, not GDP per capita, of course. So there must be something wrong, right? So even in the financial services, once I understand more about financial services, the key is about the capital. Whoever has the capital will have the chance to compete in the financial sector. Unfortunately, after 1998, after Asian financial crisis, the appetite of the locals to be in banking sector or financial sector in general has been very much less. Of course, the traumatic experience of 1998 is important, and we learned a lot, because when we deregulated the banking sector back in 1988, suddenly it's like a cold. Everybody feels I have to have a bank. Even you are just big merchants in electronics or big merchants in any consumer goods, I think I have to have a bank. Then suddenly there are so many banks in Indonesia, and what they did is mostly give the loan to their own companies. The banking system collapsed 1998. Of course, we learned a lot, but then, of course, we have to understand if the local investor appetite in the banking sector especially, even in the insurance sector, has been very small compared to the 1988 during the PACTO, the deregulation. So what we should do now? I think we need to accept there should be strong presence of the foreign ownership. Now we limit for the new banks, ownership of the banks, it will be 40%, not for all foreign ownership, but for individual foreign ownership. And then they will differentiate between if the owner is the financial sector or not. But if you are in the financial sector, you can own up to 40%. And if you want to increase your presence, then you need to find somebody else, also foreign investors. So it doesn't mean that we limit the foreign investment in the banking sector. For the old ones, for the existing ones, of course, the business as usual. You know, if you have 99%, just go on with 99%. We accept that as long as the banking sector running well. So this is, I think, our position. And in terms of ASEAN competitiveness, we in ASEAN already have ABIF, ASEAN Banking Integration Framework. By the way, it is the mechanism to make sure there will be fair competition among banks in ASEAN. And one of the requirement, you need to set up a bilateral. I mean, inside ABIF, which is multilateral, you need to set up a bilateral agreement among the ASEAN members to make sure, let's say, the banks in Indonesia can operate in Malaysia and vice versa. And we did with Malaysia. So at least in ASEAN now, as the Bank Mandiri or whoever in Indonesia can now set up the operation. It's like full banking operation in Malaysia, because both Indonesia and Malaysia have agreed on the reciprocal basis in terms of the banking operation. The unfortunate is still Singapore, because Singapore still cannot accept the agreement, the bilateral agreement between for the banking sector. It means, although I don't think any banks in Indonesia will have big presence in Singapore. I think the market in Indonesia is so big. Why you have to look for small market like Singapore? But still, the idea that Indonesian bank has branch in Singapore will create leverage for the Indonesian bank itself. But unfortunately, until now, we haven't signed any bilateral agreement between Indonesia and Singapore in the banking integration framework on a reciprocal basis. Although now there are some, of course, because they have been there for so long time, the banking Singapore ownership in Indonesia. But again, in financial services, I think it's clear the potential is there. The last issue that I would like to raise, because later this afternoon I have to go to Parliament, start discussing the amnesty. The issue is liquidity. Okay, the issue is liquidity. Loan to GDP ratio in Indonesia only 30%. Loan to deposit already more than 90%. Meaning liquidity is very tight. Singapore loan to GDP 200%. Okay, their loan is twice than their GDP. Meaning that the liquidity is misplaced. Liquidity should be placed in Indonesia. And this is the reason why we propose the amnesty. We want to bring the money back to Indonesia, rather than the banking complain to us, why do you issue so much government bond? It will absorb the liquidity. My answer to them is, it's not about the liquidity crunch. It's not about government crowding out the liquidity. It is about lack of liquidity, because our liquidity is not here in Indonesia but somewhere outside. And I can assure you, those will be at least similar with the current liquidity. Currently, the dana pihak ketiga, the deposit Indonesia around 5,000 trillion rupiah overall Indonesia. And I think the liquidity, the Indonesian money outside is more than that. Hopefully, some of them, half of them, coming back to Indonesia with this program.
and it will increase liquidity at least by 100%. We want to have Indonesian banks enjoying liquidity of 10,000 trillion rupiah, not just 5,000 trillion rupiah. But we cannot just printing the money like that. Central bank is not a factory. We need to get the liquidity from the place that, you know, they are not supposed to be there, you know. They are supposed to be in Indonesia, not outside Indonesia. So I believe this program could be the game changer in terms of making financial services more competitive in Indonesia and can give the, you know, better services for everybody in Indonesia. So hopefully you can understand the idea behind the amnesty, because everybody talking about amnesty is just forgiveness. No, it's much more than forgiveness, because this is just amnesty, and we only forgive the ones who evade the tax. Okay, if you do drug, if you do some money laundering, it's your own responsibility. We only care about your tax evasion, tax avoidance. And then again, in the mind of President, he always talk to me. I always think amnesty is identified with repatriation. If amnesty without repatriation, I will consider this amnesty as a failure, because amnesty has to lead to repatriation of the Indonesian money somewhere outside. I don't have to talk about the possible amount, number, and everything. I think, although it's still unofficial, the Panama Papers already give you some leak regarding the potential of Indonesian money outside. Of course, some might argue, oh, it's okay to build. It's okay to build SPV as long as they report all the income and pay the tax. Of course, SPV is not illegal. It's legal as long as, you know, you report all the tax income to the authority. And which authority? Indonesian. Because if you are Indonesian having SPV in Panama and then you invest from SPV in Panama in Indonesia, you should not be considered as FDI. You should be considered as Indonesian. But according to current statistics, they are considered as FDI. And I think we need to review again in BKPM whether we have that many FDI or actually only half of them. Because half of them might be Indonesian acting like FDI, you know, because of the SPV in tax haven. And I can give you the data, the BVI is the most favorite tax haven in Indonesia. It's not Panama. Panama is not even in top 3. BVI is number 1, you know. So if somebody can make a leak on the BVI paper, then most of you will be shocked more, you know, with the story. Thank you very much.